Jesus, True Review drops off an online cliff for a few months and turns full weep. Look, before you start calling me very valid things, you should first at least hear me out on this one, okay? If I'm being honest, going into this game, I was not prepared for what awaited me. On the surface, no, even the bloody title of the game invokes images of reused farming simulator mechanics. What's Harvestella about? Oh, it's a game where you need to plant crops during the spring, maintain them during the summer, and harvest them during the harvest. Ella. And run a successful farm. No, it's literally not about that at all. On the surface, Harvestella looks like a farming sim with JRPG elements. In practice, Harvestella is a surprisingly deep JRPG with some farming sim on the side. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it's a mechanically simple Final Fantasy game with what looks like optional farming on the side, but in practice, and as we'll get into later, there's nothing more mandatory in this game than optional farming, and I mean farming in more ways than one. And now I realise I've got a problem lying in front of me. Usually this is the part of the video where I go, Harvestella is a game about blank and whatever, story. But I know if I go ahead and do that, then I'll be spoiling the main point of the game, and I kind of don't want to do that, because I believe that this is something you should experience for yourself, but fuck it, I'm gonna do my best. So you begin the game by creating your own customizable character, and you are free to pick between a female character, a female-looking male character, and a female-looking non-binary character. So when I came to do this part, I took the hint and played as a girl. This was a strange feature of the game right off the bat, and I think I know what happened. I think the devs first of all designed the female character models, and were happy with it. Then they went to work on the male models, but only as they were finishing, one of the guys in the dev room was like, everyone, I think you've made another female model. And then they realised that release day was literally the next day, so they left it as it is, added in a non-binary option to hide their fuck up and released the game. So anyway, pick from one of 3 effeminate-looking protagonists and then colorise them as you please. You'll then wake up in the middle of town after a heavy night's drinking, in the middle of what might as well be the medieval equivalent of a nuclear fallout.
Hey, you're finally awake.
A floaty-looking girl will tell you to follow her for a bit, and then she tells you that the fate of the world depends on you, as well as a load of other vague stuff that you know she won't reveal to you until right near the end of the game, and spoilers, that literally happens, and then you pass out again. This time when you wake up, the fallout has ended, and you've been picked up by possibly the best person who could come across you at a time like this, that being the local doctor.
Hey, you're finally awake.
She escorts you back to her place initially, before changing the venue to an abandoned farm, and I wasn't liking where this was going if I'm being honest, but she says that despite the thriving town that's right next door, no one has thought of taking over this farm, so I guess you've got dibs on it because you were unconscious on it first or something. This is where the farming sim comes in, and I think it's best we talk about the farm first before we tackle the meat and veg that is the main story. Okay, now this might come as a shock to many of you out there, but this game has 4 seasons. The game starts off in spring, before moving on to
Summer breeze makes me feel fine.
then fall, then winter, and then back to spring. Throughout the entire year, you'll be able to tend to your farm, which at the start of the game will only consist of a small area covered in rocks right outside your front door, but as the first year progresses and you collect more fairies... don't ask. You'll begin to unlock new areas, or biomes, around the farm, including a water-based one and a cave-based one too, allowing you to sow biome-specific seeds. Almost all produce in this game is seasonal, with the exception of a few, and you'll have roughly 30 days in each month to grow as much stuff as you can. After growing whatever you've chosen, you can then either store it away, which can then be used in food crafting, which acts as health items, buffing items, or in most cases, usually both. And I did love the fact that you can eat entire meals during boss fights, though you do get animation lock when this happens, and it's painful to watch your character munching down on a plate of tacos while AoEs appear beneath your feet. Speaking of food, you can only eat so much at one time since you've got a hunger meter, limiting how much the boss fight buffet will include, but for whatever reason, juices and smoothies don't count, and you can chug as much of that shit as you want, even if it would burst your stomach for real. Alternatively, you can sell what you've grown by placing anything you want sold into the nearby shipping container. At the start of the game, selling what you've grown usually doesn't yield you much in terms of cash, or Gorilla as this game calls it, but I went through my entire playthrough referring to it as Gorilla, so that's what I'm going to refer to it as for the rest of the video. In fact, selling some of the produce is a complete waste of time, as I found selling carrots Oh, my bad, I meant carrots. Because each one will make you a 5 gorilla profit, which in this game might as well be cool. And at first I was wondering why I wasn't making any money. But as the seasons go on and you start growing other stuff, you'll find that you're making way more money, which you can then use to buy more seeds that will make you more money for more seeds. And is there any point in any of this, I hear you ask? Well, actually yes, because you may have remembered me saying that while you're not required to get involved in any farming if you really don't want to, you also have to. Though we'll talk about the combat later, one way of improving your stats is by buying weapon upgrades for you and your party members. And this costs money and rare items you'll find throughout the game. And aside from side quests, and believe me, that's not a good way of funding this, you'll find that the only real way to make proper cold hard gorillas is by ploughing the field, or pond, or cave, or whatever. And good luck getting through the rest of the game without weapon upgrades, since some of the later bosses include DPS checks. And sure, okay, I breezed over them before, but as you go through the main story, you'll also gain access to additional fairies to help around the farm. The point of the fairies is that they'll grant you more effective farming powers if you manage to complete a set number of farming challenges that they've set, such as harvesting 30 rice or 20 straw buddy. Yes, straw buddy. Now, this is all well and good, but from what I can gather, if you pardon the farming pun, is that pretty much everyone who has played this game has one major gripe with the farm, and I'm inclined to agree. Now, in this case, I think it's better to go with show don't tell, so what I'm about to show you is unedited, and I want to see if you're able to pick up on it too. Here we go.
Bye-bye!
The first time I heard that, I nearly shat myself. I swear I did not add that in there like that. A black loading screen, while often an annoyance, is also a safe space for us players. We're not expecting anything to appear on that screen unless it's useful text or hints about the game. At the very least, we're expecting to see the word loading appear on there at some point. What we're not expecting is a creepy voice that sounds like it's right up in our ear to wish us a bye-bye, but in the tone that suggests that we're about to die. This only gets worse as you collect the rest of the fairies, who will also say their unhelpful bit whenever you use one of their farming powers, such as ploughing more than one tile at a time, watering more than one tile at a time, or mass harvesting crops that are fully grown. That's pretty much a basic cover of the farm. You can also construct a couple of barns that you can use to house not chickens and not cows to produce milk and eggs, and you can also construct different processing machines that you'll need to install in your farm to produce more items and food, so there is somewhat of a production chain in this game. For instance, if I want to make a meal that requires cheese, I'd first need to set up a barn and buy not cows and feed them with feeds that you either buy in town or make myself, which in turn also requires me to grow grass from grass seeds, then convert that into feed using a feed maker that I also need to construct. After one day, the not cow will have produced 1 milk. I would then need 10 milk and have constructed a cheese maker, to which I then place the milk in, and wait another day to get 4 cheese, and then I can finally make that damn meal. You can also make money around the game by doing various deliveries in the form of food deliveries to various towns and fishing deliveries to that one sea monster who lives on your farm, who, after I managed to collect every damn rare fish in the game, gave me my rewards, but didn't say anything to me. Not even a, wow, thank you for getting all those fish for me, they sure were delicious, I mean they'll look great on display at the, aquarium, with seasoning and some tartar sauce. Turning in food or fishing deliveries will net you, again please pardon the pun, a lot of money if you manage to do enough of them, though I always did find that the food requests were a little bit strange, as the story was always the same, i.e. the local tavern wants to expand their food menu, but they don't know what food items they want included, so they give you a list specifying what food items they want included. And it's always local famous dishes that everyone would have heard of, so is this really the best way of expanding your menus? Next up, we'll talk about the combat. Now, I'm not saying this is a criticism of the game, but it should be noted, literally everything combat related in this game is relatively simple. You'll start the game off with one combat style, or job if you're familiar with anything that Square Enix has made before in the RPG genre. This job is the fighter job. It's a standard hack and slashy type job. But as the game goes on and more people join your party, you'll gain access to different jobs, including a mage class where you can cast spells, a spear-based class where you can do jumping attacks with a spear, and this would be a lot easier if you at home are familiar with the various Final Fantasy jobs, because then I could just say Dragoon, Machinist, Black Mage, Sage, Samurai, Ninja, etc. And then for some reason there's Black Mage / Machinist. Because guns are always more fun if you can also cast explosions with them. You are allowed to level up 3 jobs at any time, and you can switch between your chosen 3 during combat. For example, I spent most of the game playing as Fighter, which was the first job you get in the game, mainly because I felt it was fun. But I did switch to Avenger a couple of times near the end of the game, because the game wanted me to fight a mini-boss that was standing on top of purple stuff that poisons you if you step in it, and I didn't want to play by those rules. So anyway, I started blasting. You can also bring along 2 other people from your party to assist in combat. You can only assign party members when you're next to a save point, and that is all there is to party members. You don't control them in combat, you can't get them to perform any attacks outside of a very specific situation, and even then it's only during boss fights, and it doesn't happen all the time. In fact, I'd even advise you to not feel responsible for their safety, because they'll quite happily stand in as many AoEs as possible. In the end game boss fight, Istina literally kept jumping into the first AoE she saw. But unlike you, where if your health gets to 0, you'll wake up the next day at home where Crest, the local doctor, will break into your house and steal your wallet as payment for the medical bills before telling you not to do it again, if your party member's health gets to 0, they'll just drop out the fight for 30 seconds before coming back at full health. So sod 'em, let them do whatever, just manage your own health. Party members are literally there to deal more damage. That's it. Don't worry about them, don't think about them. Treat it as if they're not even there. Anyway, I've been putting off the story, so I think it's time we started talking about that. And like I said near the start of the video, I generally think that this is something you should experience for yourself, so I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything here, but keep in mind that I can't really justify the game's plot fully without spoilers, so I'm just going to be selective, I suppose. Anyway, after Cress, the doctor, manages to get a copy of the keys to your house that she embedded in a bar of soap and has let herself into your house as much as she damn pleases, you begin to learn about several strange occurrences about the worlds that you now find yourself in. First of all, you were found at the start of the game wandering around town during a monthly event known as Quietus. This takes place on the last day of every month, and during this time, the world gets blanketed in red dust. Anyone who goes outside and breathes this in will become so sick that they'll eventually die. In these situations, everyone has agreed to stay indoors, lock the door, don't go outside, and ride it out. Unless of course you're the health secretary and you fancy banging your assistant. Incidentally, Quietus also kills off any plants you have on your farm that haven't fully grown or been harvested yet, although trees are an exception to this rule for some reason. Also, for whatever reason, Quietus is also the only time of year where you're allowed to go down the well on your farm, and I think that sounds funnier out of context, so I'm going to leave it at that, rather than explaining that it's an optional dungeon. Anyway, you seem to be the exception to the rule when it comes to Quietus, because you're free to go outside and do whatever during this time. You also hear that the Sea's lights are acting weird around this time too, and after finding a crashed alien pod that appears to be associated with the Omens, who are a feared race of what might be advanced aliens, or robots, or robot aliens, we're not sure yet, you discover one of these Omens inside the pod. This turns out to not be an Omen, but a girl from the future, who has somehow crash-landed in our time because this is a medieval fantasy setting. However, despite nursing her back to health at the farm, she awakens and rushes off to the nearby first dungeon, where you encounter the first of several main antagonists called Geist, who looks like the daddy of all Omens, who is interested in this girl from the future, known as Arya. You manage to fight him off with the help of another Omen and a talking unicorn that can cast lightning from its horn. What the f*** am I playing? And following this, Arya decides to join your party. She says that she needs to find a way of getting
Back to the future!
And that she believes that the Sea's lights that are acting up is probably our best start at figuring out how to get her home, and thus you begin journeying around the world, visiting the 3 major towns and recruiting more people to your party. Unfortunately, if I go any further and explain what's happening in this story post chapter 3, then I'm going to be spoiling this game. But for anyone who's interested in this game, then I actually recommend you stop watching this video now. Okay, you've been warned. For those who aren't convinced, then I'll keep talking. Because it turns out that pretty much everything I've told you about the story setting was a fucking lie. The main plot twist of this game is that Harvestella is a JRPG set in a medieval fantasy setting.
But not really.
Though you've got no reason to suspect this, as you've probably made your mind up regarding the game's setting, there are some very mild hints to suggest the opposite. For instance, are we sure that this is a medieval fantasy setting when we also have advanced robots in it? Why is it that the unicorn keeps talking about a princess, and we keep getting news reports on a royal family, but no one has ever seen them before? What exactly are the Siege Lights anyway? Where does Quietus come from and what's causing it? Where did the Omens come from? What is their purpose? How are we explaining time travel here, and is Arya really from the future or what? You'll naturally ask yourself these questions as they pop up, but the game is pretty good at getting you to not worry about it right now, as there are more pressing things to concern yourself with. As the game goes on, you'll encounter more people who are unlucky enough to join your party, including Azul, a dull male character whose character arc effectively ends after you've completed the second dungeon, and don't get me started on his social link. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ, what was going on there? Then there's Estina, who I had in my party for the rest of the game, mainly because she does good damage and her special combat animation is awesome, or at least it was when my PC wasn't lagging during it. I thought she was okay as a character, but that was probably because of her humble attitude towards every situation. I say this because her backstory is about as JRPG generic as it gets, being a former secret assassin who has fled that life and now wants to do the complete opposite, i.e. looking after kids. I guess a background check for aspiring orphanage caretakers applicants' criminal records isn't a thing in this world. Then there's... and apologies if I got his name wrong, but I have it on good authority. This is how it's pronounced in Japanese, despite him possibly being German. Heine.
He said Heine.
Get back over here.
Heine.
Who I personally didn't like at the start of the game, since every time he'd appear on screen, he'd try to spend as much of his allotted screen time as possible hitting on pretty much everything that's female and moves. And while he gets better as a character as the game goes on, and as you do his social link story, by the way, it's not actually called that, but this game comes with some Persona vibes, so whatever, it's social links now. While he does get better as a character, he still does revert to being kind of a sleaze every so often, with the last scene of his social link involving him teaching kids how to hit on women. Then there's Emo, and that's pronounced Emo, not Emo. Potentially being the fan favourite aside from maybe Arya, Emo is the last of her race, since technically she's not human. She's the last of the Sirens, and while her story does delve into the tragedy of what it must be like to not only be the last of your kind, but also know that your parents are vilified by the very place you call home, I did find it kinda disappointing that we never get an explanation for where the Sirens actually come from and that whole thing. They're just kind of there, and we've got more Siege Lights to investigate, so don't stay too long in this town, please. Also, I don't know if this is important, but I feel compelled to let you know that she says meep. Make of that what you will. Although, while we're on the topic of Emo's story, did anyone else who played this game think it weird that the ex-landlord slash human trafficker ended up showing up during that one cutscene during the bartender's questline and was treated like a hero? He walked in during that one scene, told everyone to stop giving the bartender a hard time, and then everyone was like, thank God our friendly local human trafficker was able to come and save our bartender from closing down the bar. Ah, what a guy. If only we had more human traffickers like him about to make the world a better place. In fact, I counted 3 times during this game where the main antagonist of that section of the game gets defeated and then shows up very soon after and acts like they're there to save the day. Spoiler alert, and this is probably about as risky as my spoilers will get. Geist being one of them! You defeat him about the halfway point, maybe a little more into the game, but then he shows up not long after that and is like, my personality has been reprogrammed, so now I'm a good guy, let me help. One of them even joined your party! What I'm trying to say is that this game has big balls when it comes to its story, but no balls when dealing with its own antagonists. Anyway, back to the characters. Next is Braka, who was okay if I'm honest, and with a simple to understand personality and backstory, though I personally didn't appreciate having to fork over 3,000 gorillas just for the pleasure of continuing the main story. Bracker is a mercenary, and to gain access to the 4th dungeon, you have to hire his services so that he'll take you to the entrance of the dungeon. But I'd been spending the entire game up until that point blowing all of my money on tomatoes, so I was broke when he presented his palm to me and coughed, and I ended up having to spend several in-game days farming just to raise enough gorillas to pay him off so I could continue with the main story. Next is Shrieker, a wonder child and missionary for the local cult. Not to throw dirt at anyone watching this if you're religious, because I'm a legit you do you kind of wanker, but I was surprised and impressed at how much grief this game gave its own religion. Without giving too much away, the local dogmatic cult is trying to indoctrinate as many of the town's citizens as possible, but the entire thing turns out to be a scam, and Shriek has to try to find a place for herself in this new order, so to speak. I also found it funny how much shit she gives the player during the first section of her social link. I'm not kidding, literally half of it was spent having Shrieker belittle you, and since this was coming from a tiny missionary whose religion was just proven to be a scam, I thought it was great. Your last 2 party members are an omen called Dianthus, one of the rare occasions where an omen actually works with you, despite the game going to some lengths at the start of the game to establish them as evil without actually showing much evidence for it, and finally there's the aforementioned unicorn, who isn't actually a party member now I think about it, except for that one case, but I generally feel it better to let you experience him for yourself, but if you're expecting a magnificent and angelic creature, then you're looking in the wrong place. Alright, then there's Arya, the time traveller. Arya is pretty much the closest thing you'll have in this game to a best friend, and by that I mean she lives with you for half a year. Although judging by all those cutscenes, it seemed best for her to eventually move out of your place, since I lost count of how many times she'd wake up the main character in the middle of the night for a cutscene. One of which involved her fixing a radio. I mean, could this not have waited until the morning, Arya, or does it really have to happen at 3 AM? I quite liked Arya for most of the game, although if I'm being honest, for those who have played this one, you'll know what I mean by this, but there's one plot twist near the end of the game that kind of put me off her. Without giving too much away, something happens involving Arya, but once this is resolved, all of the characters continue like nothing's happened, and I was pretty much the only one who was like, so this is awkward, are we not going to talk about what just happened or what? Incidentally, the party members I chose to use through most of the game was based on who did the most damage in combat, meaning I prioritised upgrading those characters' weapons first. So naturally, it irritated me whenever Arya would then leave the party for plot reasons, forcing me to put Aslan the Teen like some kind of unwanted substitute. It also begs the question of what the rest of the team is doing when they're not in my party, and that they're several meters back from the fight, cheering us on as the other 2 in my party start getting acquainted with as many AoEs as possible. Now, I appreciate that I've said multiple times throughout this video that I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but there's something that I desperately need to talk about that concerns probably the biggest dilemma of the game, while at the same time giving you as little context as possible, lol. It involves the game's use of the trolley problem. For those who aren't aware, the trolley problem is a philosophical conundrum. Imagine you're standing by the side of a rail track that splits into 2 separate tracks while you're next to a switch, and a train is quickly approaching. On one side of the track, 5 people are tied up on it, while on the other side of the track, 4 people or less are also tied up on it. If you hit the switch next to you, the train will end up switching from track 1 to track 2. Essentially, the issue comes down to this: if you don't hit the switch, 5 people will die, but if you do hit the switch, less people will die, but you actively had a hand in their deaths. Now imagine this, but on a much grander scale, and that's the situation you'll find yourself in near the end of the game. And while this is a really interesting concept to implement here, I did feel that the game dealt with this in a really bad way. What happens in this game is that you get the ending from Mass Effect 3, where you're brought in front of a device and told that you've got 2 options that will determine the end of the game. There are only 2 options, stop thinking that there's more than 2 options, there's only 2 options, for fuck's sake there's only 2 options. So you pick an option and you get a bad ending. Reload the game, choose the other option, and get another bad ending. What you actually have to do to continue on with the game is go for the 3rd option. I thought there were only 2. But the way the game handles this was ridiculous. Essentially what happens is, after being explained the trolley problem, you're supposed to go, nah, this is dumb, I'm not picking anything. In fact, I want the train to just disappear. I'm going to leave and find a way to convince the train to stop moving before it gets here. How much time do I have? Oh, as much time as I want? Great! I guess I didn't need to make a decision after all then. In fact, I've noticed this several times throughout the game. The fact that you've got this in-game date and time in the top corner of the screen at all times gave me Persona vibes in that I should do stuff and complete dungeons before a certain deadline. Turns out, nope, you've literally got all the time in the world. In one part of the game, one character heads off to begin what is essentially Armageddon and you need to chase after them. But you could just easily go back to farming and doing side contents if you wanted to and head over to them a month later and they'll still be sat there waiting for you before beginning the countdown, like they've just walked up to the terminal to begin the activation sequence and then got an extreme case of forgetfulness that lasted a whopping 30 days or something. Fortunately, during this time, you can keep yourself busy with more farming or even get involved in the many various side quests that can be found throughout the game. And there are lots of them too, most of them even being its own quest chain. Although I will admit that these quests were very hit and miss. Some of them were excellent, such as the one quest where you come across a broken down robot called Scott and learn that he's actually a human and you witness him die. Or that one quest where you assist the town of Leith in solving the mystery behind the haunted well, only to find out that it's the mayor who's turned the bottom of the well into his own private boozer. Or the girl at the orphanage who tries to sabotage her own chances of getting adopted so that her friend will get adopted instead. The problem is that while you get many quests like this that are either funny or tug on your heartstrings, there are quests that borderline did my head in. The 3 kids you meet at the start of the game in Leith involved way more miscommunication than was necessary, and all for something that could have easily been fixed by you, the player, telling them to just fucking talk to each other, save me the hassle, and just give me the cash so I can go and buy more fucking seeds. Or the lighthouse keeper in Shatola, who refuses to repair the lighthouse because he's afraid of being the cause of more people dying at sea, and that's why he won't do something to prevent more people dying at sea. Or the old man in Argene, whose adopted granddaughter turns out to be a scam artist and tries to have you killed so that she can rob her new grandfather blind. But after going back to turn the quest in, the old man says that he knew the girl was a scam artist, but treated her like his granddaughter anyway. They make up, the quest ends, and I'm left there wondering why she wasn't reported to the authorities for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. No point, I guess, if the person I'm reporting this to in Argene happens to be that one girl in the Order who listens to people's confessions and then goes behind her church's back and acts upon what she's been told. Possibly the worst questline was the one where that mercenary's wife tasks you to look for her husband because he's been away for too long. You eventually reunite them, but things turn sour. So he says to her that he'll wait for her in the wilderness and you're welcome to join him, but that he won't move from that spot until she shows up, suggesting that he'll be there all the time and you can go there and speak to him whenever.
But not really.
Because it turns out that despite this guy promising to wait in this one spot for eternity, you have to visit him between a certain time of day, meaning he disappears if you don't get there in time. And even if you do manage to get to him within the allotted time, he'll say to you that you don't need to wait if you'd rather not, and saying, okay bye then, resets that part of the quest and you have to go back to him another day, suggesting that his wife will only agree to talk to him at night and on the condition that you've stayed with him for an entire day. That's the bulk of the game, if I'm honest. The main story was surprisingly good and quite dark in places, while the side content, while there's plenty of it, was a mixed bag of both really good quests and a bunch of time wasters. But I can't rightfully finish this video without talking about the post-game content, and honestly, there's not that much from what I could gather. There's the optional dungeon still to go, more farming if you wanted to, but then there's the option to choose what this game calls a life partner. And despite the images that may be appearing in your mind right now, imagine forming a new romantic relationship with one of the characters in the game, but without the romance. Okay, basically involves asking one of the characters to move in with you. The mayor will show up one day and give you a recipe to craft a ring. You craft it, and then you get to choose which character you want to send it to, providing you've completed their associated social link. Then you wait, get an invitation to go and speak to them at a very specific time in the evening, and since this is post-game, I didn't have anything else to do, so I ended up doing donuts in the air in my spaceship until 7 PM, and then you get a cutscene where your chosen character will move in with you. Now, I chose Cress as mine, and I have to say, the second she moved in with me, I immediately regretted my decision. And there was no point choosing her in the first place, I guess, since she already had keys to my house without my consent, judging by how much she'd break into my place at the start of the game. And once again, I feel it best to show you why I regretted this rather than tell you why, but just for some context, imagine you've just started seeing someone, and on that very day, you've asked them to move in with you, and the very first thing they say to you once they're inside your house is this.
I'll keep giving you medical exams until the day you die.
And that's the moment where I stopped playing. I like to think that, canonically speaking, my custom character ended up being the first victim of a new serial killer investigation, since it sounds like I ended up moving in with the female version of Jeffrey Dahmer. In conclusion, I was generally surprised at how much I liked this one, and this is definitely going to be a recommendation from me. The game starts out quite chill, and it does go out of its way near the start to show itself off as a proper Sunday morning chill out type game. This doesn't last, however, as the further into the game you get, the more shocking the twists and turns get, to the point where it ends up being quite a large-scoping epic tale. The soundtrack is exceptional as well, with many sections of the map, which are seasonally themed, having seasonal themed music too. Boss battle music is great, and one of my favourite tracks is actually when you trigger a fear fight, which are essentially optional bosses that are way higher level than you but drop some sweet loot. Mechanically, it's simple, visually it's good but not special. Story and cutscenes do act as a visual novel, however there is almost no voice acting in this game at all, and when there is voice acting...
Hello, little crappies. Bam! Think up, bubbles. Bye-bye!
yeah. There's plenty of content to be had with multiple dungeons, secret areas that you can go and unlock further into the game, and plenty of side stuff to be had. I ended up finishing this game with just over 75 hours spent on it, and I'd completed the main game, all side quests, social links, fishing deliveries, and almost all the food deliveries, but that's only because I didn't want to wait half a year in-game so I could grow chocolate. But overall, I had fun with this game. It was quite a shock to be playing what I thought was a chilled out experience, to then have the rug pulled out from underneath me, revealing a trapdoor leading down to a creepy basement beneath my feet. But it's certainly something that I'd recommend to anyone interested, or anyone into JRPGs. Just a heads up though, the game does end pretty much like most other Square Enix games does, where you battle against a supernatural force that wants to destroy everything, and then the characters all send letters to you after, letting you know how great they're doing these days. Ordinarily, I'd suggest waiting for a game to go on sale before buying it, and if you want to do that, then sure. But I'd also say that the asking price is actually quite reasonable for the experience you're getting here. But if you can make your peace with that, and Cress murdering you in your sleep once she's moved in, then I'd definitely suggest picking up Harvestella when you can. Bye bye!